Scientists are sure that climate change is happening. It's not a myth. It's real. And we humans are causing it. Centuries in the making, our exploitation of nature for our own benefit has not been without consequence. At the beginning of this quarter, I asked myself why climate change has been allowed to happen, and my research has led me to some unexpected places. Our climate crisis is, at a fundamental level, caused by our perceived distance and difference from nature. Today, humanity dominates nature. There's no doubt. We bend it, command it, transform it, and destroy it in order to benefit in some way. We act as though someone else will pay the price for our exploitation because we fail to realize that we are not separate from nature. We are a part of nature and we cannot survive without it. Whatever harm we cause to the planet, we're actually causing to ourselves. So where does this separateness and superiority come from? Lynn White Jr., a famous Christian environmental ethicist, published a fiery and famous article in 1967 called "The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis." Lynn White was the first person to draw a connection between Christian values and climate change, and his most poignant claim is this: Christian interpretation of the Old Testament's mandate for humans to have dominion over nature laid the foundation for a society that actively subdues nature for its benefit. He tends to make sweeping generalities about Christianity and other historical events in his article. With these generalities in mind, I still largely agree with White's assertion. In this presentation, I will elaborate on White's claim by zooming in on two historical turning points in Western Europe that led to our current climate crisis. The first moment happens when Christianity started to spread across Europe. The second moment occurs during the 17th century, when biblical interpretations became far more exploitative of nature than they had ever been. These moments are important for understanding the change in perception that ultimately permitted humanity to master nature. Part 1. The Christianization of Europe. The Christianization of Europe entailed the adoption of Christianity by pagan tribes and societies across Europe. During the medieval period, the Christianization of Europe altered the way Europeans perceived nature forever. This process entailed pagan tribes and societies adopting Christianity, mostly by force but sometimes voluntarily. Christianity and pagan religions had contrasting perceptions of nature. Pagan tribes were animists. To them, nature itself was conscious and mystical. Just like humans, plants, and animals, and even inanimate objects like mountains had souls, which means that they also had intrinsic value independent of their relationship to humanity. Mainstream Christians held no such beliefs. They understood nature as no more than living matter that contained patterns and symbols useful for understanding the mind of God. Christianity's human-centered perspective postulated that nature had no intrinsic purpose outside of humanity's relationship to it. Therefore, when pagans converted to Christianity, animistic beliefs eventually dissolved. White calls this the greatest psychic revolution in the history of our culture because, without animism, the people of Europe became more indifferent to nature. Eventually, this indifference gave way to an active interest in exploiting nature, culminating in the destructive outlook we have today. Part 2. The Scientific Revolution. Genesis, the creation story told in the Bible, is crucial to Christianity's perception of nature. It's the story of God creating earth, with humans being created on the last day. Verse 128 of Genesis speaks about humanity's relationship to the rest of nature. It reads, "God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." The story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden was important to the understanding of this verse. When they were banished from the garden for eating fruit from the tree of good and evil, humanity fell from a state of divinity. One verse reads, "God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky. He brought them to the man to see what he would name them, and whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name." Medieval theologists believe that one of Adam's original traits was his comprehensive knowledge of nature. They thought dominion over nature was achieved through the accumulation of knowledge about the natural world. This perspective about dominion was limited in scope relative to the later interpretations of the Reformation and scientific revolution, which is when modern attitudes about nature first began to appear. During the medieval period, Christians ascribed to a metaphorical interpretation of the Bible in which the stories had hidden meanings underneath the literal narrative. In the 17th century, Christian theologians began to interpret the Bible in a literal way. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing became a literal set of instructions. This movement toward a literal interpretation is intertwined with the attribution of godlike qualities to humanity. The writing of Marsilio Ficino, an influential Catholic priest, provides a really good example. He wrote, "Man everywhere utilizes all the materials of the universe as though all were subject to man. He makes use of all the elements, the stones, metals, plants, and animals, and he transforms them into many shapes and figures, which animals never do. He not only uses the animals, but he rules them. He does not only use the animals cruelly, but he also governs, fosters, and teaches them. He is the God, without doubt, of the animals, since he uses all of them, rules them, and teaches some of them. He is established also as a God of the elements, since he inhabits, and cultivates them all." This excerpt clearly shows how the literal interpretation of dominion had instigated a boundless ambition to conquer nature and led thinkers to believe that humans were more godlike than creaturely. Richard Bauckham, a prominent researcher of environmental ethics at the University of Cambridge, sees a connection between this godlike dominion and environmentally exploitative tech through Francis Bacon's ideology. Bacon was among the most influential scientists of the 17th century and most known for his contribution of the scientific method. Yet, that wasn't his only contribution. His unique perspective on the meaning of human dominion set a new vision for society. To Bacon, God gave humanity the right to dominion over nature, which meant using nature for human benefit. In his perspective, when Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden, humanity's ability to exercise dominion was severely diminished. However, this dominion could be restored through the development of powerful technology that enables the exploitation of nature. To Bacon, reclaiming dominion is the highest task because it is done out of love for the entire human race, so it was morally just. Reclaiming dominion over nature would liberate humanity from the negative aspects of the human condition and allow us to reach this godlike status we once possessed. Eventually, Christian dominion became secularized as it combined with science and technology. Bauckham explains how the sense that humanity has unlimited power to exploit nature has fed into modern development, investing science with hugely utopian expectations, but also inspiring the hubris that overreaches its capacities and brings unforeseen and disastrous consequences into being. So what? Why does this matter? Well, as Lynn White puts it, what we do about ecology depends on our ideas of a human-nature relationship. Ultimately, the destruction of the global environment is a product of the technology born of secular dominion, which is grounded in Christian dogma. We may not see the modern environmental crisis as a Christian problem, yet it remains true that no new set of values ever replaced the Christian ones. White posits that we will continue to have a worsening ecologic crisis until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason for existence save to serve humanity. In this presentation, I've outlined two important moments in Christian history that represent our shifts in belief about nature, providing a foundation for our current climate crisis. That said, the Christianization of Europe and the scientific revolution are incredibly complex, and they do not exist in a vacuum. Rather, they sit in a complex framework of forces and historical events. More than anything, I want to start a conversation about our relationship to nature among the youth, since we will be the ones combating the worst of climate change. So, If you're like me and you're upset about climate change and you want to do something about it, hear this. Stopping climate change will not only require a redesign of our technology and political systems, but it will also require a complete overhaul of the way we perceive nature and our relationship to it. Thank you.